So, good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. We're excited today. We got two classes joining us from across North America, having some tech issues, but it's kind of exciting. We've got Miss Nelson's grade 6s in Bowmanville in Ontario. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, welcome in. And we've got Miss Hanlon's grade 4s in Freehold in New Jersey. Hi, guys. Can you hear me? We're still sorting out some stuff. That's okay. They're there. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we are joined live in Windsor, Ontario by Dr. Adam Sirek. So he is a physician, a captain in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And in 2017, when the Canadian Space Agency put out a call across all of Canada for astronaut candidates, thousands upon thousands of people applied, and Dr. Adam made it into the top 17 in Canada. So he's going to explain a little bit about what the process of training to become an astronaut was like, and a little bit more about the amazing work that he does. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Adam, and take it away.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks to Jesse for inviting. I'm going to bring this up here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
Yep, we're all good.
So as Jesse said, I'm a physician. I work with the Canadian Forces as a pilot in the Air Force. I teach here at the medical school. And I had the opportunity to meet some amazing people to apply for a job that is literally out of this world. So what I'm going to tell you about is a little bit of the experience that I had and some of the fun I got to have along the way in our quest to find Canada's next two astronauts. So astronauts, when you think about that, when you see them, when you hear about them, most people agree they're pretty cool people. They are true explorers. They are true ambassadors for not only our countries, but for the entire world and for all of humanity. They're the first who get to leave our planet, who are going to be the next to Mars, who are going to be going out into the solar system and doing very cool things. They are definitely true adventurers. So who am I? I do a whole bunch of crazy different things. I never have a good answer to what I do and what's going on. The short version is I spent a lot of time in school. So for you people in grade 4 and grade 6, imagine that I went all the way through to grade 12 in high school. Then I went to undergraduate university for 4 years. Then I did a master's degree for 2 years. Then I went to medical school for another 4 years. And then I did another 3 years of residency before finally I could get my first real job. That's a lot of schooling, but it was a ton of fun all along the way. So I work as a family doc. I teach at the university here. I teach in the medical school. I also work as an officer in the Canadian Forces. I fly airplanes. I have a business that I've started up on the side. We're developing cool new technology for use on the Moon space station, working with the Canadian Space Agency. And I do a ton of all sorts of other things. And what's missing from this is that, at some point in time, I have a real life. So, I get to go skiing on the weekends sometimes. I fly planes for myself. I hang out with my kids. We do fun things. And those are all the things that don't get really pictured there when we talk about work. Now, as part of the astronaut selection process, we all knew from the beginning that only 2 of us were going to be picked. So that meant that about 4,000 of us were going to be failures. But the question is how do you define failure? We got to have a ton of fun, meet a bunch of new people, push our own boundaries, and find out what else we can do. And from a lot of us in the finalists group, as you'll see along the way, we're not people that you would consider failures. Granted, Josh and Jenny won, and so the end of this story is that Josh and Jenny are 2 new astronauts who just graduated from astronaut training this last week, and they are great people and great ambassadors. But for the rest of us, we got to learn a lot about ourselves and do a lot of fun things along the way. So let's talk about the astronaut selection process. A little bit of an insider scoop here. Most of the other countries in the world are pretty jealous of the way that Canada does things. We spend a whole year and a lot of money to pick 2 unbelievable people to represent our country for now and into the future. This is something that not many other countries do. They do a bit of a selection process, but nothing like what Canada does. So I'm going to give you the insider scoop on what happened to us and the cool things that they put us through to get to where we are. Where did it all start for me? So Jesse knows this. I started as an air cadet. So when I was 11 years old, I joined the Royal Canadian Air Cadets and followed a bunch of friends along the way, and we ended up learning how to fly. So picture this, when I was 16, instead of getting my driver's license, I got my pilot's license. So I was flying airplanes before I was driving cars. I know, pretty cool, right? And I still do fly with this program. I go back and I take youth flying and I teach kids how to fly, and we have a ton of fun. And every once in a while, I get to take other people up flying too. And it is a great experience soaring up in the clouds with no engine. So it's like sailing a boat through the sky, and that's gliding. And that was my start, and that kicked me off into the Air Force. It taught me a lot about physical fitness and leadership and citizenship, and of course, a ton about aviation. And it really set my mind off to thinking about what could be done in terms of meshing all the fun things that I do in my life together. So the Canadian Space Agency was looking for a really stereotypical type of person. When you look at the astronauts, they're all really cool, but they have a lot of key features together. They have integrity. They have good reasoning. They are motivated people. They have great judgment. They're good communicators. They're really good at teamwork. They're resourceful. They're great public speakers. And so the space agency put together a program that looked at every single person who applied and teased out all those qualities and ranked us against each other to find out who was the best at everything that was going on. So how do they do this? Well, first of all, they open it up to every single Canadian everywhere in the world. So at the end of, or the mid of 2016 in August, they put out the call for who could be Canada's next astronaut. Said anybody who's a Canadian, doesn't matter where you live, you can apply. So about 8,000 people started applications, 7,793. At the end of that, because it was about 200 pages of a long application, it was a very tiring thing, 3,772 people completed acceptable applications. So you can see the spread across the country and overseas, the male to female breakdown. And they spent the rest of the summer behind the scenes. None of us knew what happened. I just figured mine had gone straight in the shredder. And they started whittling us down. So, come September, there were 1,706 of us left. Come November, there were 163. And then come December, there were about 100 of us left. So they were whittling and whittling and whittling to find out who was the best of the best of the best. And then all of a sudden, there were 72 of us left. And that's when they started telling us that, hey, we were still in the running, which was pretty exciting. Now, remember, I said I'd been through a lot of school. When you look at a lot of the candidates, though schooling was not required, as long as you had a university degree, any university degree you could apply, the fact is that most people spent a lot of time in school. Among the 72 finalists, we had 210 degrees in total. That means about 3 degrees for every single person. And they were spread all across Canadian universities from coast to coast. They were spread around the world at other international universities. It would included degrees in engineering, in medicine, in physical sciences, in biomedical sciences, and aeronautics and aerospace, and then a whole bunch of other things scattered in throughout there. So the short version of this is that at the end of the day, if you want to go to space, plan on spending a long time in school. You need to love your learning. So the 72 of us, they brought us together and they started finding out who was truly the best of the best and whittling us down of the last ones. The first thing they did when they brought us together was they took us to a Canadian Forces facility and they really found out who was physically fit, who could handle this, and who was mentally competent, who was going to be able to think on their feet, adapt and move and do things despite the fact that they were making us do obstacle courses and swimming and running and lifting and all sorts of other things that you see the astronauts doing. It was basically like the boot camp movies. So if you've ever seen movies where people are doing their basic military training, that's what they put us through. A lot of us had military backgrounds and we had done sort of this stuff before, and that was helpful because we knew it was coming. We knew that 3 a.m. was not going to be sleep time. 3 a.m. was going to be running around time. But even the guys who were in the Canadian Special Forces, who are really advanced guys who could do a lot, were saying that this was more intense than what they did when they did their initial selection. So this was the ultimate in pushing people to their edge. They wanted to see if we were totally fit, and at the end, when we were physically drained and tired, if we could find a new reserve and keep going. Because if you're up in space on the space station and there's a fire or there's an emergency, if you get tired, you can't call it quits at the end of the day. You need to keep pushing, you need to keep working, and you need to keep thinking. Now, at the end of the day, most of us, 3 degrees, we spent a lot of time in school, we were giant nerds, right? So they gave us these great pennies, and they had us marching around this military base wearing our pennies with our glasses and our shorts, and we basically looked like the major nerdy basketball team compared to all the military recruits there. It was quite a scene. And the military had been told they were not allowed to talk to us, and we weren't allowed to talk to them. So it made for some interesting encounters in the hallway. After that, they whittled us down almost in half. So there were 32 of us left, and they decided to really up the ante. So we were lucky. We would get an email or we would get a message and it would say, hey, guess what? You need to show up in X city within 24 hours. Drop everything you're doing, cancel your schedule, jump and go. So we would disappear. We would leave our jobs. We would have to say bye to our families. We'd show up and we'd end up being put through the works. We'd hand in our cell phones. And this one was really making things intense. So they wanted to know how we reacted under pressure. A lot of astronaut training is dealing with emergencies and being prepared for it so that if something happens, you are ready to go right away. So we would come in, we'd sign in, and we would read the fine print as best we could. And we'd sign the waiver that said, okay, you're good to go up to and including death, because they wanted to push us right to the edge. And so some of you may have seen something along the lines of Star Trek, where they've got a holodeck where they can recreate things. This is a military facility where they can do that sort of thing. It's very similar to some of the escape rooms that are out there right now. So you would enter a room and something would happen. There'd be a fire you have to fight, or it would be flooding. And you would need to solve the issue, stop the flood, because they would be sending the water level right up to the roof. And if that was it, that was it. Maybe the goal in that room was they wanted to see what happened if someone drowned and how would you deal with it. Maybe the fire was too intense and you couldn't fight it. So we had to go through all of these different scenarios and push ourselves and push ourselves. And then they would take us out of the freezing cold water and they would give us some sort of exercise or puzzle we would need to do, working together as a team. And then they would throw us back into the water and we would do some other course or obstacle event. And it was back and forth, really tiring us out and seeing how far they could push it. Now, at the same time, they were really studying us and assessing us. So they knew more about us than we had ever known about ourselves. So by that point in time, they had a good idea about me and they knew my secret fears. So I had spent some time doing some research on what happened on the last astronaut selection process. And I knew one of the things they were going to do was make us jump off the high board, 20 meters up in the air. Now, you may not believe this, me being a pilot, but I am actually afraid of heights. Not a big fan of it. I can't stand in the glass floor of the CN Tower. I don't like being up a tall building and standing by the window. That is just not my thing. Now, if you stick me in an airplane and put me in the controls and turn me upside down and spin me into the ground, I'm very happy, love it. But I don't like standing on tall buildings and looking out the edge. So I knew that they were going to ask me to stand up on the high board and jump off into the water. So I called around and asked all the different pools and the aquatic training complexes. And I said, I'd like to practice diving off your 20-meter high board. And they said, okay, so are you a qualified high diver? And I'm like, no. Why do you want to do it? Oh, I can't tell you. Sorry, it's a secret, because we were all sworn to secrecy. And so they, of course, said, no, you're crazy. We don't let crazy people jump off high boards, right? Because what facility would do that? So I just had to cross my fingers and go. And sure enough, when the time came, they had me up on that 20-meter platform and they had me go first because they knew that was the thing I wanted to do the least. And so we were not told ahead of time what to do, other than you get up on the platform. They said, take your arms, grab your straps, because you're holding your penny. If your arms are flailing out there and you hit the water, you're going to snap your shoulders and break your shoulders. Then they said, cross your legs at the ankle. And again, if you don't do that, your legs go flailing out like you're doing the splits, it'll break your hips. And then they said, stare straight ahead at that wall and track that wall straight as it goes down. Because if you start looking up as you go, you're going to tilt backwards, in which case your head hits the water and you break your neck. Or if you lean forward, your chin hits the water. So this is a very scary thing, which is why you have to be a trained diver to do it. But they didn't train us, they just said go. And at this point in time, we were so well trained that when they said go, I just stepped off the platform, and thank goodness they took this photo, because I had no idea if I was doing everything they said. All I was saying in my head was, please fall slower than my pee, because I was so scared all the way down. But I survived it, and I got photo proof of it. And then there were 17 of us. So we made it through the high pressure, the most intense that they could do. And then they said, let's make it even harder. So who were the final 17 people? Up on the top left, you've got Mr. Matthew Banzi, who is the chief engineer at that time of the Eden project, working for the German Aerospace Agency, the DLR. So he was creating a plant-based life support system to enable people going to Mars and living there long-term using just plants to create oxygen and regenerate everything. Very smart guy. Then you've got Mr. Alex Delory wearing his hard hat there. He was a project manager for Bruce Power, and he refurbishes nuclear reactors and nuclear power plants. Again, smart guy. You'll see there's a theme here. After that, you've got Francis Frenzel, who is a pilot in training in the Canadian Forces. He has a master in aerospace engineering. You've got Miss Vanessa Fulford, who is a flight test engineer and the chief engineer for the Canadian Forces Snowbird team. So the top demo team here in Canada, she is the one in charge of all their planes and keeping them going. Last on the top row, you've got Mr. Michael Jordan. Yes, that is the real Michael Jordan there. He is the Canadian Forces chief helicopter test pilot. Then in the second row, you've got Eric Croker over on the left-hand side. He's a PhD. He teaches at universities about orbital mechanics and science and astrophysics and all sorts of very cool stuff. On the right-hand side of the second row, you've got Joshua Kutrick, who is the Canadian Forces chief test pilot for the CF-18s or fighter jets, and he was selected as one of the astronauts. Then you've got Charles-Philippe Lajoie, who is a PhD and an astronomical scientist. So you've probably seen pictures from the Hubble telescope. There's this new telescope going up, the James Webb, and he helped to build it. Not many people have touched a very fancy telescope like that, but he has. Then you've got Jason Lushkin, who is also a student pilot in the Canadian Forces. You've got Rob Riddell there with that nice greenery around him. And now he didn't have a profile online for a long period of time. And that's because he is a special forces operative. He is a doctor who worked with the combat teams who were going in and doing special operations in the Middle East. Very, very cool guy. Then you've got Miss Jenny Sadi, who was also picked as one of the astronauts, and she is absolutely amazing. She was a professor at Cambridge, England, where she studied engines and was making brand new engines for airplanes that were more efficient, and she also studies how fire moves in space. Wonderful person. You got me, fairly boring. On the next row, you've got down there at the bottom, Miss Natalie Slino, who is a Canadian Forces officer, and she's a doctor, and she works up in Yellowknife, which is way up north in the Northwest Territories. And she has a huge catchment area that goes all the way up to the North Pole. So she is in charge of providing all the medical care for all the people, all the way up to basically the edge of Santa's workshop. Then you've got Evan Thomas, who is also a PhD. He works at Portland State University over in Oregon, and he has developed a whole bunch of new technologies to bring fresh water to Africa. You've got Andrienne Vidal, who has an engineering background, and she does research and development in the Canadian, working with chemical, biological, nuclear, and other fancy forms of warfare. Very scary lady. You've got Michelle Woody, who used to be an ex-combat engineer who fought overseas and then retrained as a doctor and was doing her residency in family medicine. And last, you've got Jesse Zroback, who's also a family doc, and he works up in the far north of Ontario in small towns, and he does emergency medicine up there. So a very, very cool group of people. And they tried to move us back and forth and mix and mingle us and try to sort of trip us up in teams. But by this point, the 17 of us worked so well as teams together, they could put any group of us together and we could accomplish pretty much anything. It was amazing. So then they took us to the Canadian Space Agency headquarters in Saint-Hubert, just outside of Montreal, and they taught us robotics, and they had us do all sorts of fun things, flipped our brains inside out, upward, sideways, all over the place. It was a ton of fun, and had us fly Canadarm2 on the space station, which was really interesting. And then they put us out in grade 6 classrooms, because mostly across Canada, grade 6 is when we do space. I'm sure that the grade 6 class remembers that, or is it going to come to it at some point? And we got to talk about space with people from the Canadian Space Agency to a class and see how we would react under pressure talking in front of a class. And the fact is that people love space. That's why you guys are here listening. That's why your teacher signed up for this. Space is very cool. And I found out that my patients, even though I was disappearing all the time, were very supportive of the fact that Canada was doing neat things in space and that NASA had done some pretty amazing stuff. Then they took the final 17 of us and they threw us in front of the media. And that was another fun, interesting event. So they presented us, the minister was there, Jeremy Hansen was there, we had a ton of fun, and then we got to go through a media scrum where a whole bunch of reporters would take us one by one and ask us questions and grill us, and some of them were actually not real reporters, they were embedded people trying to trip us up because it was all still part of the testing from the Canadian Space Agency. So everything we did was being watched under a microscope. Now the 17 of us sat down together and we tried to figure out what is it that gets you to that end? So the 17 were the official finalists of the Canadian Astronaut Recruitment Campaign, and of that 17, only 2 were going to be picked. And so we played the game. Who's going to be there? What was it that we were all firstborn? Did we all go to the same schools? Did we all study the same thing? Were we all pilots? Were we all scuba divers? Did we all do parachuting? And there was no one thing that really tied us together, except that we had all done things that we loved. We had worked hard for it. And we had really explored things along the way and had a ton of fun being adventurous. So we all had some neat sports stuff that we did on the side. We all had done some crazy adventure. We had all done something neat, but at the end of the day, our jobs we were good at because we loved what we were doing. And that was really the only defining point, was that if you want to do something and you do it very well, then it makes it awesome. You go to work every day and you enjoy it. It's not just a chore. It's not just a job. It makes it something fun to do. And that was something that really stood out among the finalists. So who inspires us? Astronauts inspire us. We know that. When they come, when they talk, people stop and people listen. We just had David Saint-Jacques come back from 6 months on the space station. He's been going around Canada. He's been talking to people. He's been teaching people about space. He even did some web conferences from the space station. I was lucky enough that I lived in his basement for a month, which was pretty darn cool. And so the astronauts are the people who represent the best of humanity and honestly take it off our planet and take it to the stars. That's why they're so cool. Who inspired me? Well, once upon a time, there was this lady who some of you may recognize. This is Dr. Roberta Bondar. And she was an example to me who sort of broke the mold, because I thought that astronauts were all these test pilots growing up. I had seen the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo astronauts, and a lot of them were just, fighter pilot test pilots, which is why I went into aviation a lot of the time and why I thought about being a pilot. And most of my friends are in aviation and fly planes. But she showed me that you could be a scientist, you could be a doctor, and you could still do cool things and maybe get up into space. And so she was up in space on STS-42, and she did a whole bunch of cool experiments up there. And you can see she's up there with some Girl Guide cookies, and of course the ever important role of duct tape, because duct tape fixes everything, including in space. So astronauts, who are they? What do they do? And why do we care? So we know that they're the explorers. They leave the planet. They're going to be the next ones back on the moon. They are going to be the first ones to Mars. But they're also engineers. They built the International Space Station. It wasn't sent up in one piece. They had to put it together in space, which is a pretty hard and demanding task. They do science up there. They have animals up there. They're growing plants. They do all sorts of really neat things. And there are actually student research projects that go up to the International Space Station, and the astronauts do the projects that students in classes like in grade 6 submit and NASA sends up to space. So they do some pretty cool things for us. They are public servants, whether they're Canadian or European or American or Japanese astronauts. At the end of the day, they serve all of us, the taxpayers, and the government, and they're there to represent us and the best interests of humanity up in space. They do education, they do outreach, and of course, they do the cool thing, which is they get to ride the rockets and they get to fly to space. So what did I learn in my year of meeting the most amazing Canadians and trying to leave this planet? And yes, I'm still actively trying to leave this planet. One, you never stop learning. There is something cool that you will pick up every day that is going to teach you something new about yourself or the world. And honestly, one of the biggest things I learned was about myself and all the things that I could do during this campaign. The next is explore and be adventurous. All of the people who were the finalists were people who were truly interested in finding out new things, about exploring and finding out what was across the next border, around the corner, beyond the next mountain, all those fun, different things. And last was you chase your dreams. You may have been told when you were young, oh, you can't be an astronaut, there's no way. But you don't know until you try. And even if you don't end up being an astronaut, many of us are still doing things for the space agency. I'm doing new technology development for the Moon Space Station. I still go and hang out with astronauts. I'm going down to NASA later this month as part of the Human Research Program meeting, and I'm going to be down there working with everyone to develop the next things for human spaceflight. So you never know where your path is going to take you. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and give you a chance to ask me questions about the space program, the astronaut recruitment campaign, space health, or anything else you can come up with.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Sirek. We've also got a group watching on YouTube. So Miss Van Beek's class, grade 6 is in Mississauga. So if you guys want to type in questions in the YouTube chat bar, I'd like to take as many as possible from all 3 classes. But let's start by going with Miss Nelson's class. And if you guys want to kick it off, come on up.
Hands up if you have a question. Ryan, camera.
I do too. Did anyone get injured during training?
So that's a good question. And the short answer is yes. So this was very intense. This was hard work for all of us. And to some degree, we all had some sort of injury because we were pushing ourselves to our physical and our mental ends and then going beyond that. So we were running hard, we were swimming hard, we were pushing ourselves hard. And so yes, sprains and strains and little things like that did happen. Did anyone have anything major, like, their arm fell off? No, not this time. And even if that was the case, I couldn't tell you because we're all covered by Secrets Act. So don't worry about that.
Okay. Adam, if you want to come out of screen share too, so we can also you on YouTube.
Certainly.
Oh, fantastic. All right, Miss Hanlon's class, if you guys have a question.
I know you can't see us, but we are here.
Yeah.
We actually have 3 students that have some questions.
Let's do it. Okay, how about we do, we'll do, you know what, we'll do a bunch of questions per class so that we don't have to alternate between them. So let's do 3 in a row from you guys.
All right, so our first student is Juliana.
What type of planet would you like to go to as an astronaut in space?
So which planet would I like to go to in space is a great question. And actually, we were asked that as part of the recruitment campaign. And the fact of the matter is, oh, no, I'm unmuted.
You're good. No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Is that there's not a planet I want to go to. If I had to pick one, I would want to go to the moon. You guys have all probably stood outside in your backyard and looked up and seen the moon up in the sky. I think it would be really, really cool to stand on the moon and look up and see the Earth come up over the horizon and be right up in the sky, that big blue marble that they all talk about. I think that would be extremely cool. At some point in time, it'd be nice to go to Mars or further, but realistically, if I had to pick somewhere I could go and I think would be reasonable in my lifetime, it would be the moon.
Cool. All right. That's a very unusual answer. I like that. Of the people we've talked to before for going to space, they always choose Mars. Or Europa, moon of Jupiter. So
yep.
Excellent. All right, Ms. Hanlon's class, take your second question.
So our second question is Ave.
What does it feel like when you're training for space?
So what does it feel like when you're training for space? Another good question. It is the most intense, crazy thing that you have ever done. They are making you so tired all the time, but at the same time, you are so full of energy because the group of people that we're working with were awesome. You are doing something really cool, and it is a very exciting thing to be doing. All of the trainers, all of the technicians, all of the assessors were all fantastic people, and there was such an energy in the room because everyone was just excited about everything that was going on.
Fantastic. All right, and then one more from Ms. Hanlon's group.
And our last question is from Kenzie.
What happens if you run out of food in space?
What happens if you run out of food in space? Was that the right question?
Yeah.
All right. So that's a really interesting thing. So if we go to Mars right now, we are talking about a 3-year return trip. That's a long time. The International Space Station, if there's an emergency, we can have people home inside of a couple of hours. The moon, to get home, it's about 3 days in an emergency to get home from the moon. So we pre-plan for all of that. And currently on the International Space Station, there's enough extra food for about 1.5 years. So NASA has done some pretty cool research into improving how long food can sit on the shelf, so the improved shelf life. And we have bags of food that are good for 2, 2.5, almost 3 years now. It takes a little effort to imagine some flavor in some of them. And the astronauts are always really excited when they get fresh fruits and vegetables up on a SpaceX capsule, or every once in a while some ice cream. But yeah, the food is good for 1.5 years. So we are lucky that we don't even need to think about them running out. And we always pre-plan a huge margin of error for any trip, so that you don't need to do like the Martian and eat potatoes mixed in your own content.
Good word. All right, we've got 3 questions written in from Miss Van Beek's class on YouTube. So did anyone need to leave the training because they found it too hard?
So that is a really good question. And just like you probably saw in the recent US astronaut class, where actually there was someone who was selected at the end of the day and then opted to leave shortly after being announced as an astronaut, many people came into the thought of being an astronaut without really understanding what the job was. So it's not like you see in the movies. You probably will spend a very short period of your career in space. So if you're an astronaut for 10 years, you may fly to space once or twice for 6 months at a time. So 1 out of 10 years, maybe you'll spend in space. The rest of it, you're an engineer. You are helping to design the next generation of ships. You are practicing, you are training. you are doing all sorts of other ground-based things and promoting the space agency and NASA while you're doing it. You're also not designing your own research projects. You are the hands of other scientists. So you need to rethink your role as sort of the fancy monkey in space who can turn the wrench when other people tell you to. And that's not something that a lot of high performing type A individuals can do. So that's the trade-off. To be able to do the coolest job out of this world at the moment, you have to be willing to do what other people tell you to.
Great answer. And then how nervous were you to do the training personally?
Oh, I was very nervous. I mean, you have to imagine that, one, this is one of these chance in a lifetime things. And two, you are competing against some extremely highly qualified people. When you sit down at lunch with these people and they're telling you about all the cool things that they've done, you sit there saying, why am I sitting here with you guys? You guys are all way more amazing than me. I mean, I had just finished my training. I was fresh out of school. I was shocked that I even made it that far. But again, it wasn't just what you'd done. It wasn't how many degrees you had. It wasn't what credentials and letters you had after your name. It was how much you were willing to push and how much you were willing to sacrifice for the sake of the rest of humanity.
Excellent. There's two questions here, but I want to pass along this one because you've never got it before and it's so great. Why do you need to swim to go to space? There's no water there.
There isn't. It's true. But swimming is really crucial for a lot of other things. Number one of our big training facilities down at the Johnson Space Center and also in Russia is a giant pool where they simulate weightlessness. And so you need to be competent in scuba diving and swimming because if there's an emergency, you need to still be able to swim and save yourself. If you're going to be well trained, we don't want to lose you in a swimming accident. The other thing is the Orion capsule is now going to be returning back to Earth and landing on water, just like the Apollo capsules did. So we're going back to water landings as opposed to hard ground landings like in the Soyuz capsule for American spacecraft. And there have been cases, as was shown in Mercury Gemini, where people, got out, were in the water, and they need to be able to swim. So swimming is a critical life skill, and even though there's no water in space for swimming pools right now, who knows, that may change in the future. That is something that we need to make sure people can do for all of the other things that they're involved with NASA. Excellent.
Incidentally, you mentioned scuba diving, and I always like to highlight to kids when I can, at 10 years old, you can go for your scuba license now. So a lot of the classes, I think all the students here either can or are really close to being able to go for scuba. If you guys are inclined, it's a really, as you can attest, a fantastic life skill to have and a lot of fun.
Oh, it is. It's great.
Yeah. All right, let's head back to Miss Nelson's class for a few questions. So come on up, guys, and go for it.
All right, our first question is from Harlow.
What was the hardest part of your training?
The hardest part of the training, I think for me, was when they made me do that jump because I was really, really afraid of it. But I learned to overcome my fear. I said, this is something I need to do if this is something I want to do. And when they said go, I stepped off that platform. And like that picture showed, I did what they said. I don't know how because I don't remember doing it. And then I hit the water and I did what they told me to do. So I learned to put that fear aside, do what needed to be done, and keep moving.
Excellent. Out of curiosity, quick follow-up. Did they make anyone do any of their fears twice, like back to back or anything like that to throw them off?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, interesting. All right, Miss Nelson's class, come on up again, guys.
All right, our next question is from Sadie.
Hey, Sadie.
Or you can use your own question.
So why do planets have different climates?
Why do planets have different climates?
Yeah.
Like
That's a
planets.
really good question. So if you think about the Earth, we have summer and winter, right? So the Earth has summer and winter in different parts of the world because the Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees. It doesn't sit straight up like this. And so if the sun's over here and the Earth is like this and we're living on this side of the Earth, when we're going around it, we get summertime. And when we spin around the sun and we're on this side, the top end of the Earth up here is now a little bit further away than the bottom, so we get winter. So your distance from the sun gives you even just changes in temperatures. And as you get further and further from the sun, you get less and less light and less energy. And so that's why Mars is so much colder. Mars also doesn't have as thick of an atmosphere as we do. And so lots of different things change based on the planet, where it is in the solar system and how it was formed. There are other planets like Jupiter that is just a big gas giant. It's massive. It has its own giant gravitational field too, and all sorts of fun things around it. But we don't know if there's a solid core somewhere down there at the middle that's, who knows, like diamond or something like that. And so it all depends on where things formed in the solar system to give you an idea of what's going to be on the planet and what it's going to feel like on that planet's surface.
Super cool question. I encourage classes to look at some of our, we've done some things with NASA planetary scientists before, talking about Titan and moons of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars and more. They're really fantastic, and they dive in more detail than we can possibly do here. All right, one more from Miss Nelson's, and then what we'll do is do 2 more individual questions, and we'll wrap up from there. So Miss Nelson's group, come on up if you have a third one.
Is yours a good one?
Yeah.
Okay, Liam's is next.
Perfect.
What happens if the moon gets hit by a meteor?
What would happen if the moon got hit by a meteor? Well, I guess it would depend on where it got hit. But when a meteor comes in and strikes any planetary body, it comes down, it impacts the ground, and then there's a scatter of particles that come back up. So we would probably see some meteorites falling from the moon on Earth. Now, you guys may know this already, but there are lots of meteorites from planets and other planets like Mars and from the moon that are found on Earth all the time. The NASA and the United States government actually send a group of scientists down to Antarctica every year to collect meteorites because they look black and glassy and shiny, and they pop up in the snow very easily. It's easy to find them down there. And we have found pieces of Mars here on Earth. And we know that because it's got the same chemical composition in the rock that they do on Mars, as we've seen from the landers we've sent there. And they are probably old pieces of ejected rock that happened when there was a volcano eruption on Mars, or if there was a meteorite that hit Mars. So if something hit the moon that was big enough, it would send some junk up into the air, and we'd probably get a little bit of a shower over here.
Fantastic. And then something actually in my experience, a lot of kids don't know is that we have these chunks of other planets, but the fact that scientists go to the bottom of the world to look for, pieces of Mars and the moon is just, it's so cool. All right, we'll take 2 more questions, guys. Miss Hamlin's class, if you guys want to come up for one more, go for it.
We have Nico here.
What kind of animals are you putting up in space?
Yeah.
What kind of animals are up in space? Really good question. So there are a lot of rodent studies that go up in space. So there's special rodent habitats for mice that go up there. And a big reason why is they're pretty close to us. They're mammals, but they have a much faster life cycle than we do. So we can sort of put them up for a 30-day mission or a couple of month mission, and we can put them through their entire lifespan and see how space and microgravity and radiation affect them, as opposed to us, where, if they did something in 30 days, it would be like 20 years for us. So those are really cool things. There have been fish in space. And one of the things I thought was the really coolest part was that the fish swam up and down compared to the orientation of the module that they were in. And so gravity didn't seem to be as big of a deal for them. And they found out that a lot of the fish have, instead of gravity receptors that tell them up and down, they used light to figure out where up and down was. And so they could orient themselves in what was normal for the astronauts just without gravity, which was pretty darn cool.
Outstanding, very cool. All right, and then one last question from Ms. Van Beek's class online, and sort of is builds off the rodent study, is do you know if there's a maximum amount of time someone can spend on the space station?
We do not yet. So that is something that we really want to find out at some point in time. We have currently been doing 6-month missions to the space station, just because that's the easiest rotation for capsules going up and capsules going down, the lifespan of how long a capsule can be parked at the space station safely and still have enough battery life to come back. We did the 1-year mission recently that I'm sure you guys heard about, where 1 Russian and 1 American astronaut spent 1 whole year in space. And we need to push those boundaries more and more, because if we're going to Mars, it's a 3-year return trip. That's a long time to be gone from your family. It's a long time to spend in space. And we need to know what is going to happen to the body and what we can do to keep the body as strong as possible for the time they come home.
Excellent question, guys. I want to stress before we wrap up that we've been highlighting via Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants something called the Junior Astronauts Program over the last year. So actually, Adam, if you're aware of this, if you want to speak to junior astronauts, you'll probably do it even better than I will. So go for it.
Well, the Junior Astronauts Program is, as far as I know, a program that's been put on now by the Canadian Space Agency. And it's the opportunity for young, adventurous explorers to go and learn hands-on about space and all the different science and engineering and cool things that astronauts get to do, and actually do a lot of it themselves. And I believe they have a summer program where they actually get to go to Montreal and spend time hands-on at the Canadian Space Agency, and I would assume at the Cosmodome. Western here in London, Ontario, is actually putting on a similar program for young explorers, and they do a summer program where you learn a lot about space sciences and planetary sciences, And it's very similar, though it doesn't have the cool factor of the Canadian Space Agency involved. There are also programs in the United States run through NASA for American individuals, so for a class from New Jersey. And then when you get up into the high school level, there's a number of internships that you can do down at NASA, and you can actually work in a space center and work with NASA and get some hands-on experience there, and potentially one day maybe even get hired on by one of them.
Very cool. So with that said, Dr. Sirek, is there anything else that you'd recommend to classes that they want to learn more about space, learn more about how they can become astronauts? Anything that you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, so the Canadian Space Agency has a number of great videos on their YouTube channel. So you can take a look at those. The NASA does as well. And using those videos as a sort of a step off point to see some of the cool things that are going on is a great option. The other thing you can do is you can follow Josh and Jenny, are two new astronauts, and you can see what they've done in the last 2 years as far as their training pathway and the things that NASA put them through in their ASCAN or astronaut candidate training, because it was only just recently on the 10th that they got their official silver pin and they became full-fledged astronauts.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Adam. And as we wrap up with every Hangout, what I'm going to do is demute the microphones of our classes joining live. So Miss Hanlon and Miss Nelson's class, if you guys can get ready to join me in saying a huge thank you to Adam for joining us today. You are both demuted. Go for it.
Thank you.
No problem. You guys enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Adam, that was fantastic. We look forward to having you back anytime. And for now, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll pass along all those resources in an email in just a minute, so check for that. And you guys can go do some exploring of your own.